All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, if you want to pop into the chat where you're from. Oh, thanks, Yuli. Where you're tuning in from. We're going to have an awesome conversation today about multimodal experiences, the elusive multimodal conversation experiences.
Wow, Croatia. That's awesome.
Croatia, nice. I apologize if you can hear a leaf blower in the background. Seems to be getting louder, not quieter.
I know the struggle for y'all. Like my last apartment, we had the leaf blower come twice a week. And it's just so hard when you work in voice because it's like, I need peace and quiet.
I know.
A lot of no match errors.
Yeah. Half the time you're like recording a demo video and it's just like, I can't work with this. Alrighty, so I'm gonna get started with some of our awesome panelists' bios. We will start with Kent. Kent is a senior conversation designer at LivePerson with experience in designing and consulting for conversations. He is also an improv comedian and an award-winning screenwriter interested in exploring new ways to communicate. Thanks for joining us today, Kent.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
And Elaine is a conversational UX designer at NLX, providing design support across the whole range of NLX's conversational AI offerings. She has previously worked on projects for market-leading technology companies such as Apple, Google, and Facebook, where she applied her data annotation, Spanish translation, and cross-functional account management skills. Oh my God. Are they literally breaking into my house? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. I think they're leaving. Okay, thank you so much for being with us today, Elaine.
Yeah, super happy to be here. Super honored to be with other fellow multimodal designers.
And Ryan is a conversation designer at Google, designing for smart speakers, smart displays, and mobile. He works on Google Assistant's answers, health and fitness, and productivity features. Thank you for joining us today, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
Super excited to kick off the conversation. And attendees, thank you for joining us. We're really glad that you're here today with us. So without further ado, you all submitted some amazing questions, and we will hop right in. So just to kind of set the baseline for the conversation today, our first question for our panelists is, what is your definition of multimodal design? And Elaine, would you like to start us off? And then Kent and Ryan, you can follow her.
Yeah, so multimodality, like I've heard it defined a lot of times as like taking multiple inputs and kind of having multiple outputs as a response. I'm kind of aligned with that definition because there are so many different ways that we can communicate. So multiple inputs and how communication can be displayed. I also like adding the human element to it. So I consider multimodality as kind of like catering to our human senses and being more aware of broader context of which communication happens. So yeah, curious to hear what Kent and Ryan have to say too.
Yeah, I think Elaine, you hit the nail on the head. I like to think about all the different features humans have or may not have access to, and multimodal design is trying to design around those constraints, whether it be visual, auditory, maybe touch, haptic responses, maybe olfactory, who knows, and taste. All of these are different ways that we could communicate with people, and we have. Yeah, multimodal design to me is essentially human design of, because that's how we communicate, anyways, and trying to, as was said, before, it's making robots communicate like humans, not the other way around.
I love the idea of a smelling interface. That would be super interesting. For me, I think multimodal design is a blend of voice and graphic user interface design, at least at the moment. So VUI and GUI principles, and keeping in mind the user's context and device to know which one to use. Just like, really detailed information typically, I think, fits better on a screen, like a settings or itineraries, like information like driving directions, for example, typically are better with voice because your hands and eyes are occupied. And I think, like, at least in my more limited definition, as far as like a blend of VUI and GUI, I think the tricky part is deciding which one to lean on. So it's like you can be using more screen-based versus voice-based. I think touch is an interesting area that we haven't really explored too much yet, but would definitely be interested in seeing like how that would affect a lot of the designs.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a little bit of touch going on with just haptics and like vibrations and that kind of thing, but there's still so much room to grow and explore with that side as well. So a common challenge that all conversation design teams have right now, no matter, even if you're just dealing with voice only or chat only or multimodal, is documenting your work and creating a process around it on your team. So Kent, if you want to start us off with this one, how do you document your work for a multimodal conversation design project? And Ryan, if you want to go next, and then Elaine last.
So this question was pretty cool. So we got to review the questions before this, and this really got me thinking, because what we do currently is use flow diagrams, and we use Lucidchart, and we would, have mock-ups of the imagery, of what a display might display, what it might, in voice user interfaces that I've designed, I would be like, hey, here's what the robot would say. But when you posit the question, and I was just thinking about it, I was like, that is interesting that we're using a visual modality to represent auditory interfaces. Is that really the right way to do it? And it got me really thinking about whether that is the most optimal way. So that's what I use, but I'm so happy to be surprised and to hear better ways to do it, because I think it's always a constant struggle to try to find the best way to communicate your designs to all your stakeholders.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's tough. It's tough communicating audio with visual information. Typically what I use is like Figma or Lucidcharts, especially for the visual. Well, Lucidcharts mostly for the diagramming component. Figma, typically if there's some sort of like graphic interface that has to be represented. But really anything I think works as long as the idea is communicated clearly and consistently. Like sometimes I even use Google Docs or slides. Like if it's really, really simple, I don't think there needs to be a sophisticated, flowchart, or like any audio editing software that lets you piece together the audio, just to show like what the experience would actually be like. But yeah, I think as long as you're using similar tools that the team understands, anything is probably fine.
That's a really interesting point, Ryan, like using tools that the team understands. hands. I think for me, working at a startup, you know, I came in as an individual contributor. So I was kind of like figuring out what kind of works for my team. And when you're with a really small team, it's kind of just easy to like pull up your Figma file and be like, this is what I'm working on, guys. But, you know, over the past few months, NLX has grown. So I've actually started dealing with like, you know, people not having Figma accounts to actually look at my prototype. So most of my documentation right now does live on Figma. If you're on my team and you have an account or you just want to look at it, prototype's all there. My voice track is there. You can actually preview it because one of our developers actually created our own internal plugin that we use with Figma. So we just open the plugin and you can actually have the vocals and the images side by side. So it's like no need to like look at some text, you can actually hear it. But you know, as the team has grown, then like people are like not installing this plugin because like that's not relevant to like their day-to-day. So what my team has ended up coming up with is actually creating like these demo videos because a lot of the time when we're showing our prototypes, it's kind of like the screen doesn't make sense. Like, why would you do this? Or it's like, I didn't hear this particular detail that I really needed to hear here. And it's like, sometimes it's like, but that's like the incomplete picture. Like you're just looking at the visuals and you're not really listening to the accompanying voice track. So creating videos that are kind of like, you know, almost like a real prototype had it been built out is generally the way that we are going now. Like it's a lot easier to kind of just like give someone a 2-minute video of like what's going on and have them have that full context.
So Elaine, is that you literally like taking an iPhone and just recording the interaction on a smart speaker, or like how do you create those videos?
Oh yeah, so like to put it in context, what we do at NLX is I actually work on Voice Compass. So we have a patent pending technology that actually combines, you know, anything conversational AI with a mobile UI. So it's actually mobile websites that I'm designing. So what we actually do, and actually my coworker actually takes care of this, she just records your screen. And then she overlays like the audio while you're looking at the screen, like Figma in presentation mode.
Gotcha.
Kind of adding on to that, it's been mentioned in the intro, but I do improv comedy. I perform for kids K-4, and so you know we used to perform at New York City schools, but after the pandemic, we've come in. So I have like these green screens, you know, and I'll put them all over and make these videos, but it's been an interesting transferable skill. Well, where I can make a video of me being in the subway or being in the car, you know, and it's silly. It kind of, but I feel like certain stakeholders really get a kick out of it, just seeing a video, and it's nice because you can hear it. You can about what the experience is supposed to be.
That's a great point. It's also making me think of the TikTok green screens that you can use. So maybe if you don't have green screens at your house, you can just use something like that instead.
You did a great job with the TikTok, by the way. I saw that and I was like, oh, this is cool. You took the TikTok, put it on LinkedIn. It was awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I was like, I must be such a nerd because the only time I ever make TikToks is to post them on LinkedIn. I don't even post them on TikTok. Like it's just for LinkedIn. Anyways, yeah, thanks for kind of giving us a look into each of your processes, because I know, you know, just from the perspective of working at BotMock, we are constantly getting questions from teams, even asking us like, hey, does this look right? Like, are other teams doing it like this? And so everyone's trying to figure this out together right now. All right, so next question. Ryan, if you want to start us off. So The question is, how can I correctly think about leveraging the right affordances of voice, chat, and graphic UIs when I'm designing a multimodal experience? And if you also maybe want to explain your own definition of affordances too for anyone in the audience that doesn't know. And then Kent and Elaine, if you want to follow.
Sure. Like affordances to me is just like what is, I guess, unique to that modality, like whether that's voice, screen, or a combination of the two. I also want to steer away from the word correctly just because it's, I don't know if I can say something is correct or not correct, but I have like my own personal thoughts. Typically, I always try to keep in mind the user's context as far as like what feature they're using and what device they're on. So like mobile, for example, kind of like Kent's example of being in the subway, like people are on the move typically. They could be at home also, but like it's just like a very portable device. And so for those before like, I guess conversational experience on the phone, typically people are looking at the screen. And so like you have to keep in mind like how much voice information is really needed. And typically that is not a lot. Because if you're looking at a screen already, the information is pretty clearly communicated. So to bring up the calendar example again, if you say like show my events, like how much voice do you need if the itinerary is already on the screen? But if the screen is locked, then that's a different context again, right? Like the user isn't looking at the screen. And similarly, like smart displays, it's like kind of the other way around where users are more likely to be using as an audio interface versus a screen interface. So it's like they're using like a smart speaker most of the time. So typically I would like lean more towards providing more voice information, but it's also feature dependent, right? So none of these are like ironclad rules. If I'm using like a photo feature, I probably will be, it's gonna be much more visual for it, right? Because you're expecting users to look at the thing versus, let me think, something like music or media. That is definitely much more audio focused. But yeah, so it's kind of keeping in mind ideally all the things, which is like user context, the device they're on, and how the information is most clearly communicated.
Yeah, definitely user context. Is I think one of the more important things for me. Again, yeah, I agree. I don't like using the word correctly, but yeah, I think the oft said thing is we're trying to make robots speak human, and kind of rhyming with that idea is this we really uh, uh, just because we have this really shiny awesome NLU that could take in voices, it doesn't necessarily mean that should be applied to every user context. I kind of how we're trying to do a paradigm shift of trying to make robots speak human, not the other way around. I think the more multimodal technologies are developed, we really need to double down on being obsessed and empathetic with the user's actual concerns and contexts, and work from there rather than the other way around. So I'm always trying to ask: is the user trying to have actually having this problem? Is the user what's the user really wanting? And then seeing what kind of technologies that we have that might fit their problem.
So starting from the human need first versus like what the tech can do for us first.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm totally in alignment with what Kent said. Like, it's all about, is this addressing like a need? Is this addressing a pain point that a user might have? And looking at everything in context. So I guess my definition of affordances is really just looking at the pros and cons of each interface within a specific context, because across different contexts, like some information might be better through voice, or it could be better just like having it on the screen. There's really no one size fits all. It's more about, you know, doing the research first. I really agree with that. Most of the time when we do propose Voice Compass as a solution for our clients, it's because we have done our research. We've taken in the information that client has given us about their customers. So we definitely take all of that into account before we start promoting like this technology versus other solutions that could just get the job done as well. I think for multimodality, you know, looking at the pros and cons, an example would be like, if you have long paragraphs on the screen, like, is that really necessary? Like, could you break those up into multiple screens? Could the information be presented better by just having like a single voice track saying like, please read carefully these directions before you continue or something like that? Basically, it's so fluid. It's really hard. And I think that's why multimodal design could be so challenging, because everything is so subjective. And you might go in thinking like you did all this research and like, yeah, this is a really good polished version of this journey. And then you go out and test it or you do QA, and then people are just confused and like they can't progress to the next screen or something like that. And you're just like, oh crap, what did I do? And you have to really look at everything super carefully. It's really challenging work, but super fun at the same time.
Absolutely. And I love how we're all kind of in agreement about the word context, because context can mean a million different things. And, you know, it could be that someone is walking through the front door with their hands full of groceries and they need to get something done ASAP. So in that moment, voice could be awesome for them because they don't need to pick something up and look at a screen and get it done. But that exact same need that they have in a different scenario where maybe they just got their wisdom teeth out and their hands aren't full of groceries, they might need a screen to do the exact same thing. So that's, for me at least as a designer, where it gets really tricky about trying to figure out what really is the best for our target user. All right, so let's go on to number 6, actually. Elaine, if you want to start us off with this one, how do you prove to stakeholders that a multimodal experience is the best for your users? And then Ryan, if you want to follow her, and then Kent can finish us off.
Yeah, I think it's definitely about kind of like evaluating what are the current technologies being used in this context. So I definitely tried to research that first, like maybe something is not working. Like maybe this company has an IVR and, you know, escalation rate is super high. People aren't getting a certain task accomplished that they really just want to like get in and get out. Like they just want to do this one task when they're calling in for customer support or that kind of context. So I really try to look at the data first and then try to evaluate, okay, does this situation require something like a multimodal solution? And if I feel like certain technologies are not being used to like their full potential, that's when I start, pushing the conversation toward like, maybe we should do a voice compass journey for this specifically and not just like a chatbot and not just like an IVR. And mostly like the thing that I'll always bring up is like, well, you currently have an IVR and like you could reboot it, you could, mess with it and make it sound more human or sound more pleasant in general, but maybe someone is trying to, set up a new account. And like, so that's something that we generally do with like a visual, like a GUI. So maybe they just want something that's like still being automated, but like they could do it on their own. So having that extra information with voice plus the screen and then just like not have to worry about it, like being put on hold for a really long time. So those are the kind of points that I start bringing up. Like, is the current technology not being like useful for customer? Like, first of all, I'll always bring that up, and then always like, if this is a really complex task that could be automated but doesn't require like a live agent, I'll always bring that up as well. Like certain tasks, like we have to admit it to ourselves. Working in conversational AI, it may be fun to automate everything, but that's not the case. Like sometimes people really do need to talk to a person. So it's mostly just about like not going to that extreme, but also, you know, being aware that, you know, sometimes having multiple interfaces could be the best solution.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Elaine said. I think it's important not to like force multimodality when it's not needed. You know, whatever, sometimes the simplest answer is the best answer and oftentimes the right answer for users. And a lot of UX is a blend of science and art already. Like you understand why users are, you know, going to your feature or going to your service. You can make a case whether or not it makes sense to be multimodal. I think on my end, it's like, there's all sorts of things to consider. You can make an argument based on traffic, for example. If you have a lot of like users on mobile devices already, like that might be a situation where multimodality makes a lot of sense. But if there's like situations like an IVR, someone's on the phone, like, I don't even know how you do that to make us, I guess, multimodal experience on the phone. But I just mean like, it kind of depends on what feature they're using and what they, like what makes most sense for the experience.
Yeah, 100%. It's important not to force multimodality when it's not needed. That's super important. And also, sometimes on I heard this voice user interface thing is a thing. Is my connection all right? It said it's unstable. So sorry.
You're back.
Okay, sorry. So just to reiterate, sometimes stakeholders are the ones trying to force multimodality, and it's our jobs as designers to also sometimes say, you know, voice user interfaces, you're really gung-ho about it, but the specific problems that you're trying to solve, it might not be the one. So that needs to be built into the process of being able to have designers push back. And it's particularly difficult when that is the SLA to implement voice user interfaces. How do you navigate that? So at that point, in my experience, we needed to talk to sales to really do an assessment there of setting up an SLA that allows us to flourish and create a situation where the stakeholders and you are in alignment in terms of what exactly you're trying to solve. Sometimes stakeholders would come and say, hey, we're trying to solve this problem. But in fact, what they're trying to do is a branding exercise of being able to say, hey, brand X is now doing VUI. So if that is their honest truth, we could find ways to make VUI work for their brand, their users. It may not be specifically the use case that they had in mind when they pitched the idea to you. So it's almost like therapy. It's asking everybody, what do you really want? And does the technology actually help you get what you really want? And then kind of working backwards from there and then saying, okay, then maybe we use this, this, and this to get you exactly. To be honest, it's manifested in a way that might mislead them towards outcomes that are not particularly optimal for them.
Thanks, Kent. We have a good question from Brenda in the chat. Does anyone want to take a stab at that? She asked, when you say multimodal, do you mean multi-channel as well? And I agree with her. I think this is kind of a point of confusion in our community. Does anyone have an opinion on this?
to be honest, what is the difference? I feel like it's like a Venn diagram that has a very big overlap in terms of the definitions of these words.
Yeah, I mean, in my head, personally, I think of multimodal as kind of the umbrella term, like multi-channel comes beneath multimodal. Would you all agree with that?
Okay, that makes sense. And Brenda is saying chat bots can have video, pictures, and text, but it's only one channel. Just clarifying definitions. It's just so correct me if I'm wrong, or if I'm not on the same page. One channel might allow users to access many different modalities, right? Like a phone could be visual if it's a smartphone, but it could also be auditory.
Right.
So so channel, I guess, in terms of the etymology of these words, multi-channel comes from the perspective, perhaps from device manufacturers and people who are trying to sell products. Multimodal might come from the perspective of which is that distinction maybe correct?
Yeah, so yeah, if you're talking to Alexa and on your kitchen counter, you could have a conversation with her where she has a little image that's supporting whatever she's saying to you. Or she could, if you say, you know, send me a list of the top 50 restaurants in my area, she could send that to you, to your mobile phone via text. And now you're leveraging two different channels and it's multimodal. So I think we're all on the same page here in terms of like any multi-channel experience is multimodal, but not all multimodal experiences need to be multi-channel, right?
I think do you want to go ahead?
Please.
Oh, okay. Well, I think we also have to like go back to like the inputs and outputs. So certain chatbots can only take one kind of input. So I wouldn't consider every chatbot that has like GIFs or supporting images multimodal, because it is still like only relying on one of your human senses, which is like you're just looking at it and the only way you can interact with it is typing. So I think that's a very restricted kind of interaction. Whereas I do also kind of agree that the lines are blurred between multimodal and multi-channel. Sometimes, you know, having a smartphone can have so many different interactions, like you're tapping and then your phone vibrates and all of these things, like you can speak into it. I think it's more of like if people have read, you know, Cheryl Platt's book, like a lot of these things you have to look at it in like a broader context of what's happening, like moving across different devices, moving across different, you know, environments and just different interfaces. Like if you start off a journey with a chatbot, but then it makes you call their IVR or something like that, I would say that is multi-channel and multimodal. But you know, if we're looking at like the super fine details of what makes them different, I guess you can find differences, because if you look at them individually, then you would say like this is one channel, this is, then you're moving to another singular channel. But it's so fluid.
Yeah, and in terms of like from the perspective of design, when people talk about multimodal, I'm thinking of maybe like scalable development. When I'm designing something that is good for, let's say, visual modality, I have a certain bit of confidence to think, you know, this might work. If it works for an iPad, it might work for a computer. It might work in terms of scale. When I'm thinking of one visual modality, I'm thinking of all the channels that have a visual modality and in which they could that development might scale. So even if when you're passing off to a different device, that doesn't necessarily mean multimodal as well. If the devices are similar in feature set. So that's kind of the way I probably look at it.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, cool. So did everyone answer the question about stakeholders? Yeah, I think so, right? Yeah. All righty. So number 8 is an interesting question. Ryan, do you want to start us off with how can you test the entirety of a user's experience in a multimodal conversational journey? And then Elaine, if you want to follow, and then Kent.
Yeah, I think that kind of depends on the definition of every possibility, because like if we're saying like literally anything anyone can say, right, across every language, that's probably not possible. But typically you have your main use cases and those can be tested. My personal preference is generally to test experiences very, very early, like as early as possible. Like even literally just talking to another person and just role playing your experience, you can kind of see the general paths different people will take through it. And then you can reinforce the areas that people are going through. So instead of just kind of like guessing which directions like people might take your design, I think it's better to use like actual user data and then kind of design around how people are actually interacting. Kind of what Kent was saying earlier, like kind of making a computer interact more like a person versus the other way around. It's just like, I think we should bring that process like really, really early, so that we don't have, or there's less guesswork involved. But even doing that doesn't mean like users won't say something entirely new. So I think like the idea is to have a very robust, diverse sample size of people to go through your experience across all walks of life, ages, and demographics to see if like they can use it. Or you have like a dedicated QA team to try to go through it. But again, even despite all that, it's like very tough to kind of guess everything. So testing it as often as possible with real users is ideal.
Yeah, testing is super important, I feel like, because, especially when you work in design, like none of your designs are actually done. Like most of your designs are trying to serve a purpose, and sometimes, people's needs change over time. So you definitely have to like stay in tune with what people need and maybe what they're facing. Like a current example could be like very clearly what's happened in the world over the past year, like the pandemic. Like if you think about the travel and the hospitality sector, like all of a sudden, like needs changed. So like people were calling in for completely different reasons than they were before. People were not booking flights. People were trying to cancel them or reschedule. So definitely need to test and make sure that you have a dedicated testing team, make sure that you're trying to capture like different kinds of users, and definitely looking at analytics. Because, like the thing that brought me into conversation design, me coming in with like a biology degree, I love the fact that we get to look at analytics and really try to like piece together like this story based on like quantitative data, like drop-off rate, or like because again, Voice Compass does use mobile websites, so we can actually track people's like what they're doing on every screen like through the entire journey. So it's really looking at that, kind of trying to piece together all of these different working pieces and trying to see like what didn't work. A/B testing, kind of just trying to make sure that you're not trying to be super biased, and that, again, bringing other people's opinions into your design. I guess, yeah, like in general, it's kind of really hard to, like if you're going back to the question, like, how do you test the entirety of the experience? Yeah, it's pretty challenging. I guess you have to like break it up into different parts, each interface, what they're doing.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Entirety being a keyword. They could be anywhere. They could be I mean, one way to test somebody's experience in the subway is to stick them in the subway and have them go through the experience, right? And that's a lot of that takes a lot of resources. I think what at the crux of it is trying to be as empathetic as possible for the user and also the stakeholders, and trying to figure out what they exactly want, and asking honest questions of whether the that is interesting. Again, reading this question and kind of thinking about my process, one of the things that's interesting is analytics uses a lot of heuristics to suggest success. But it's again interesting that we're using visual modalities to measure success in perhaps an audio modality, and then we get into the issue of okay, so can we record them and have that data stored in our databases to look at that, and it becomes an ethical concern. So there, it's again an ultimate test of empathy, of the trade-offs that you're willing to make, and being upfront about what you're trying to provide for the user. I think this is a very, very complicated question that really hits the core of how to be a good designer, of how do we listen to people when the ears might not be there. Yeah.
And I'm also hearing that there's a lot of room for tools in the space that can help us actually test across channels, across modes, across different contexts. There's not a lot out there right now. Kent, can you cite some examples of how multimodal conversational experiences are helping with better accessibility and inclusion? Sure. And then Ryan, do you want to follow? And then Elaine, finish us off?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you cut out for a second. Yeah. Could you start over?
Sorry. I'm pretty visual when it comes to things. What number is the question?
Oh, sorry. It is number 12.
Okay. Yeah. This is very anecdotal, but I think one of the first interfaces, or at least in the United States context, one of the more common multimodal experiences that we experience is the drive-through, and McDonald's drive-through. And you have the visual and you're talking to the person. And what was interesting growing up as kids of immigrants, sometimes going up to the counter and ordering was a little more difficult, as opposed to a interface that will listen to you and then would display what they think you ordered. It'll come up on the little screen saying, okay, 20 chicken McNuggets. Mm-hmm. That gave visual confirmation that they heard what we said. And I found that to be very, very awesome. And sometimes you'd prefer that. This was kind of more of a linguistic accessibility issue that was being solved. And I think those are, and that's purely anecdotal. I just wanted to share that. But multimodal has so many ways of providing help across linguistic barriers, across ability barriers, and uh,
You cut out on your last sentence, Kent. Would you mind repeating it?
oh, that's one example.
Well, that's such a
I'm
great.
sorry.
I love that example. It really really clearly showcases like what's really going on when you know, have a totally different kind of confirmation given back to you than the auditory confirmation.
Yeah.
Like kind of two channels. You're almost like back channeling with a visual GUI, which
exactly, and the visual looks exactly the same. You know, the
yeah,
menu and
like,
this looks the same. We're understanding each other. That is so comfortable compared to, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this right. They said something. This might be wrong. I'm not sure you have my right answer. I get the food and there's no cheese. You know, it's like, okay. It helps. It helps.
It's like one step short of actually being able to press a button of an image, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Love the example. Fun to kind of see like multimodality in everyday kind of applications that we might not always be thinking about, but that definitely makes sense. I think at least for accessibility, I think like just voice interfaces in general already have what's the word? Like for people who are able to easily touch screens, I guess, I think using voice is game changing for a lot of people if they're unable to move very easily. So it gives them control over a lot of things that they may not otherwise have control over. And I think gives a degree of independence, especially like smart home features, for example, if you're able to control a lot of that stuff through voice. I think it's really well suited for a person who can't, go up and flip a switch as easily, for example. So that's as far as like a physical example. I think as far as inclusion, just like an example of, I think what Google has been doing is, at least I like, it's like as far as not trying to not gender the assistant voices. Like I think a lot of assistant voices are stereotypically female, for example. Well, after they released a more male sounding assistant, they labeled them voice 1, voice 2, not like male or female. Now they're colors actually. And I think when you set it up, there's like a 50-50 chance that's either a male voice or a female voice. And I think it's like, yeah, it's great because then I think like unnecessarily gendering a voice of any kind of voice assistant is not the best thing to do. And so the sort of like randomness to it, or less like focusing it on one or the other, is like a helpful way to include more people.
That's very cool. I didn't know that they had switched that, Ryan. Elaine, any examples come to mind?
Yeah, I think my general answer to this question is we're not really there to really, like the technology is not yet there to really provide really, really great inclusive and accessible experiences because, we don't really have like super great technology that could take, a gestural input, like just looking at something with your eyes, like staring at something at a screen or just like waving or something like that. We're not really there to really, really encompass every kind of, like every kind of context, different kinds of disabilities. And I do like that there is a combination of different modalities happening with mostly just, like the GUI and the vui. Having those visuals and voice together doesn't mean that you're like stuck with one in case like like you have like low visibility, low sight, or you're hard of hearing or deaf, like you don't have to be stuck with one. So it does help that, but I think in general, we're still not there to really have like super inclusive experiences. I think there's a lot more that we could do and a lot more like waiting to happen. Like I'm still kind of like looking forward toward like a smart city, smart home future where like different kinds of inputs can be used. Like maybe you come home and you have like different sensors going on that you have programmed to like help serve you to do something. And then you start like a conversation or something like that. I think, yeah, I'm really excited to see what more comes out. I think in general, you know, I feel like our things in voice technology are still a little bit too centric too as well. If we're talking about languages and culture, I think there's a lot more that we can do having conversations with each other across different design teams, across different countries, to really get into like the nooks and crannies of like how people communicate. So I don't really have like a great example of like good multimodal experiences. It's really hard to design for. So I do kind of, you know, forgive people's mistakes because we're all still kind of learning. We're all new to this space.
Yeah, it's such an honest answer. And I totally agree that we're really in the beginning days. And, you know, we're at a very interesting inflection point where voice doesn't have to mean only voice in and only audio out. Like our laptops have speakers on them. Uh-oh, we lost Ryan. Hopefully he'll come back. So when you're talking to a chatbot, you don't just have to type anymore. Oh. You can speak to it if your laptop has mic and, you know, speaker, right? So at this point, it's kind of like how can we match the affordance to the need at the given time? And we may eventually end up in a scenario where we can receive almost every kind of input, whether that's an image or speech or a gesture or something else. And then we can output any variety of different ones, no matter what kind of device you're on. So yeah, early days for sure. We have a question in the Q&A actually. If any panelists want to take a stab at typing out an answer to it or answering live. I don't know how much experience our panelists have specifically with ALEXA design. Sorry, I'm just trying not to set off everyone's devices at home. But I'll let that marinate. And oh no, we lost Ryan again. I think he's
What's the question?
It's down in the Q&A. When you are, for example, designing an Alexa skill for both Echo Show and regular Echo, so screenless Echo, do you use different voice scenarios for voice only and for display devices, or do you have a single voice scenario and just attach a display on it? I can repeat the question. Would that be helpful? Also,
yeah, I think I could take a stab at it. Oh, I see it.
Okay, cool.
I think going through the voice scenario and then attaching voice is fine. One of the problems sometimes when you run into this experience is going to be for voice and voice plus display. When you design for that, one of the problems sometimes is like, let's say it's like a game show host, you know, and we're playing 3 games and we're in game 2, and everybody should know that we're computer, what state are we in the game, and you know, it'll answer. When you're designing for both, you might run into this kind of trap where you're like, oh wait, we could just display it on the screen. We will delegate this clarification to a visual modality. But then now your intent to create a game that works on both, now you're shortchanging the voice people the voice only people, because you used a visual modality to cover for a inadequacy or a problem you could solve in the voice. So I would just kind of a prescriptive way would be just design voice and then try to convert that in a way that allows visual to be part of it. But again, then you're not taking full advantage of the visual modality. So it's tough, but you just got to be really thinking about, okay, for the customers that only have a visual audio device, are we creating the best experience for them there? All right, now, all right, we could still use some of the stuff that we learned from the voice modality, but we got to also start to think, okay, what does visual allow us to do? So it's almost like creating two different products where there's a lot of things that you could share and you could develop in a scalable way. But yeah, you always try to think, what were your original goals? To entertain people on both devices. So just keep that goal in mind as you make these decisions.
I kind of love that radical approach of almost thinking of it as designing two different products, because I think that mindset can really help in this scenario. And I would also agree that I have had the best luck with treating voice only as sort of the common denominator, lowest common denominator, and then being able to add to that with the graphics. But, you know, as you said, it's really a balance, and you have to sort of rely on your gut feel as a designer as you go. All right, we only have 3 minutes left, so I don't think I want to open up another question because I want to be really respectful of all of your time and the attendees' time. So is there anything else that anyone would like to add in general about anything we talked about, or any advice you would want to give up and coming multimodal designers?
Yeah, I can add one final note for me. I guess like being a designer for multimodal experiences for about 6 months now, I would say it's going to be hard. And I would say like kind of like you know, Kent mentioned just now talking about an Alexa scale. I think the easiest way to approach this kind of design is to not focus on one interface and then expand to many. I think it's mostly just kind to go back and forth, have that dialogue between what is advantageous with this, what is advantageous with this other thing. Like it really should be a back and forth internal dialogue, like considering multiple things together rather than just being like, I'm going to design for voice and then I'm going to slap some visuals on it, or, you know, vice versa. Like I have these visuals, I have this mobile app and I'm just going to add voice to it. It's like, no, you got to really think of it more as conversation first. Like what is going on in this conversation, and really, you know, thinking about it from there, and kind of thinking of both or multiple things at once rather than just one. So I guess that's my general tip that I have found really useful. Is just think of it conversation first, not voice first or anything other first. Just it's a conversation.
I love that. That's a great tip, Elaine.
If I may take a stab, trying to keep it short. Love your users. Just like love them. Try to be very empathetic with them, and try to, yeah, empathy is key. And I've had people ask me, hey, like I want to be a conversation designer, but I don't have any conversation design projects. How do I get started? How do I do multimodal? My advice to them was like, when you write an email, like try to empathize with the reader, and email is a modality. try to design your email to get the best outcome and try to measure those. Like, think that way. And you could do that in so many aspects of your life. You know, it'll set you up for success for multimodal, because life is multimodal.
I think for me, 10-second advice would be, if you haven't made one before, I would say just get started, and just try making one. And I think it'll teach you a lot about what design is and what multimodality like can or can't do.
Great. And with that, we will thank our wonderful panelists. Thank you, Ryan, Kent, and Elaine. This was a great conversation. I learned a lot, and I think our attendees probably did too. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great, safe Thursday. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Super great conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. And the recording will be available. So if you registered, you'll get an email with the recording. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.